and welcome to the Schism. This podcast is all about critical thinking, dot connecting, the nature of reality, and trying to uncover the truth about the world we live in, society, who we are, and where we come from. Hello and welcome to the Schism. I'm joined as always by my co-host Adam.
Hello everyone.
And today we have a very special guest on the show, author and researcher into the dark side of the music industry, Mark Devlin. Mark, thanks so much for joining us.
Hello guys, good to be back.
Well, we've had you on the show quite a few times already, so we're not going to go into your history because people can look up the previous episodes if they want to hear more about that. But we do want to talk to you about your new book, the fourth instalment of your Musical Truth series that has a rather interesting title. No One's Dad's a Plumber. So yeah, we wanted to get you to unpack that title a little bit for us and talk to us about why you chose to do this book right now.
Sure. So No One's Dad's a Plumber is a conversation starter. It's been designed to be that. And already it's shown itself to be so, because I've had people say, what do you mean no one's dad's a plumber? That's ridiculous. My mate Dave down the road, his dad's a plumber. But the point here is not to say that there are no plumbers in the world, but it's with specific reference to the music industry, because this book follows on from the 3 previous volumes in my Musical Truth series. And one of the aspects of my research, which has been consistent throughout these books, comes down to where many of these public figures, these icons, these heroes, these cultural characters who are served up to us, come from. And the key to that question so often lies in the area of family bloodlines, generational family bloodlines that go back many ages, and we find new expressions of these same families getting ushered into positions of extreme prominence. It doesn't have to be as a rock star or a musician. It could be as an actor, as a TV presenter, a politician, a business leader, a lord mayor, a judge, any kind of position that gives them influence over large numbers of people and whereby they can help to shape and mold culture and the direction that human society moves in. So music, popular music, has definitely been a part of those agendas, and we find many musicians, rock stars, who come out of these same families who, I contend, have been handed their careers on a plate. They've been facilitated for them. I'm not making that claim with regard to every famous musician. Some clearly do make it on their own terms, or at least get their career started through showing some skill and talent on their own terms. But many of them get into those positions because of the families that they come out of. And one thing that I would have expected to find very early on in my research into the music industry, when you look at the dads of prominent band members, is I would have expected to have found regular working class jobs like lorry driver, builder, plumber, docker, construction worker, whatever it is. But you don't find that, or you very rarely find that. The father of Mark E. Smith of The Fall was a plumber, so I give him a pass. But other than that, what you do find is plenty of Freemasons, plenty of lieutenant colonels, admirals, generals, high-ranking military personnel, CIA agents, diplomats, civil servants. And if it was just one or two that you would find, you could make a case for it being just a coincidence or happenstance or just one of those things. But when you see it happening time and time and time again, if you're going to be mature about it, and if you're going to apply critical thought, you have to come to the conclusion that something is going on here. A trend, a pattern is starting to emerge, and it goes beyond the realms of just the way it goes. This became clear to me very early on in my research, and this latest book is reinforcing that same point with new information that I've not presented before. So that's what this book is, really. I chose that title to just get some tongues wagging and get people talking about it, but it's Musical Truth Volume 4 by any other name, and it's taking these same dynamics that I've previously revealed, but adding new data to it to reinforce the points. So it's family bloodlines, it's military intelligence connections to famous music artists. It's dark occult symbolism and ritualistic stuff that we find in music shows and videos and promotional photos and things of this nature. It's frequency and vibration that's getting stripped into recordings. It's social engineering. It's the deliberate degeneration of specific genres through social engineering. And I shine the spotlight specifically on hip hop again in this book because that's the world that I came out of and I know a lot about it. And I've got a section at the end which I've titled The Gatekeepers. And this is specifically to do with electronic dance music. And I've singled out 5 DJs, very prominent DJs in the electronic dance music field, and done a deep dive on each of them to investigate exactly where it is that they came from and how it is that they've become as successful and as prominent as they have over and above all other competition. So the 5 names there are Pete Tong, Judge Jules, Paul Oakenfold, Norman Cook, aka Fatboy Slim, and Carl Cox. So anyone that is into electronic dance music will either get extremely irate and extremely mad and hurl 4-letter words at me for besmirching the legacy of their heroes, or they might find that there are some interesting points there that they've not considered before. And anyone that's not into electronic dance music should read those chapters because it's not about the music, it's not about that specific genre. These serve as case studies of how these people get selected and how they get elevated over and above all other competition.
Those are actually 5 very prominent names. I mean, you've actually listed off probably the 5 biggest there, Mark, when I
I think
about,
so, yeah.
about it.
Coming out of
And
Britain, at least.
yeah, at least out of Britain. Yet they all have one thing in common, which is the fact that they went over and aboard the success compared with a very niche industry like electronic dance music. I mean, not compared to the size of the pop world, but why is it these 5 figures became so prominent, in the positions that they found?
Exactly. Well, the case of Fatboy Slim, Norman Cook, is very interesting because it turns out that he attended Reigate School, just south of London. And this is now a private fee-paying school, I believe. But at the time he attended, he was a fellow student alongside Sir Keir Starmer. And the two of them learnt cello together. They took music lessons. And I've got a quote in the book from Norman Cook where he says that for a time it looked as if things would turn out so differently. And it looked as if Keir Starmer was going to become a musician and embark on a career in the music industry. And Norman Cook himself may well have been ushered into the world of politics. And I think this is what happens early on with many of these chosen ones. So it's already been decided that they're going to be ushered into the public spotlight in some way. But early days, it's not necessarily been decided exactly how. So another trend that I explore in the book is how those that will go on to become famous seem to get some early exposure on TV for 2 reasons. It's getting them used to being in the spotlight, getting them used to being interviewed and being on camera and such, and it's getting the public used to their names very early on, so that when their careers take off, they're already, semi-familiar. And I've got some video interviews which I show in the public talks that I'm doing around these books. One of them involves a young David Robert Jones, who would go on to become David Bowie. But in 1964, when he was 17, he was on an episode of the BBC Tonight Show with Cliff Mitchellmore, and he's introduced as a representative for the National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Long-Haired Men. And of course, this is complete nonsense. It's just a way of getting him interviewed and getting him on TV. And he's saying, just representing. He's very effeminate in this, very camp. And he's got his hair. He's wearing his hair like Brian Jones of the Rolling Stones. He looks just like him. And he's saying, yes, it's not fair the way we're treated just because we got long hair. And this was just a way of getting him used to, being interviewed and stuff, because a few years later he would invent the persona of David Bowie, come out with his single Space Oddity, and then his career would take off. But there are other examples that I show. So there's a clip from the Beatles' Hard Day's Night movie, also from 1964, and there's a point where the camera pans around the crowd and it picks out this young boy, 12 years of age, and he's on camera for a few seconds. Turns out to be a young Phil Collins. Before, he would become famous as the drummer in Genesis and then as a solo artist in his own right. So, what are the chances that in this Beatles movie, we have this young 12-year-old lad who would go on to become one of the biggest music stars of his generation? And I've got some examples from America as well. There's some footage of a young Jim Morrison prior to him becoming the frontman of the Doors. This was 1964 also, and he's taking part in a commercial for the State University of Florida. And he's there in his college blazer. He's got a nice short haircut and he's got his books under his arm. And it's basically an acting job. It's pretty clear this was an acting gig for young James Douglas Morrison, and the following year, 1965, he emerged fully formed as this iconic poster child for the counterculture generation in America as the frontman of The Doors. He'd grown out his hair, he's up on stage with his shirt off, he's doing drugs, he's drinking, he's exposing himself, and he's pushing the whole sex, drugs, and rock and roll lifestyle. Of course, Jim Morrison's dad, as many people will know, was the Navy admiral in charge of the fleet of ships involved in the Gulf of Tonkin false flag incident. So Jim Morrison is the son of military intelligence, as were many of the other artists coming out of Laurel Canyon. So one of them was Frank Zappa, and Frank Zappa's father worked on biological weapons research out of the Edgewood Arsenal military base. So pretty much every major musician that came out of that Laurel Canyon counterculture scene had a father directly connected to the world of the military, usually in a high-ranking role. So we've got this early piece of footage from 1963 when Frank Zappa appears on the Steve Allen Show in the US. And like Jim Morrison, he's very collegiate and very scholarly looking. He's got short hair, he's wearing a shirt and tie. And he's introduced as a novelty act who plays bicycles as a musical instrument, which of course is just nonsense. It's just a way of getting Frank Zappa on TV, because it's already known that a few years later, he's going to become one of the leading lights, the flag bearers, the Pied Pipers for that whole counterculture sort of anti-establishment scene. So this is how they do it. They give these people some early exposure. Incidentally, I was talking about Keir Starmer there, and I've got an episode of the Kilroy chat show from 1989. This is Robert Kilroy Silk, used to be on a daytime TV chat show. And on this episode from 1989, they're interviewing Judge Jules. So as a young Judge Jules, and he's talking about the emerging acid house and rave scene in the UK. And on the very same episode, Kilroy interviews a young pre-fame Keir Starmer. And he's not mentioned by name, but it's obvious it's him. You could tell by the voice and the mannerisms. And he's talking about civil liberties. I mean, you couldn't make it up. He's talking about personal rights and freedoms. Has there ever been a figure in British political history who stripped away more personal rights and freedoms than Keir Starmer? But here he is, almost 40 years ago, apparently nailing his colours to that mast. So that was an early TV appearance for Keir Starmer. And it was getting him ready for the career that awaited for him. Head of the Crown Prosecution Service, he would go on to let Jimmy Savile off the hook, of course, claiming that there was a lack of evidence to bring him to justice. And then we know what he's doing now. No need to recap on that.
You know, Rhys, you brought up a point earlier, and I think Mark would like to tackle this. These artists, they come from families of military background. Do you think, say the father, let's say Dave Grohl's father, for example, do you think he knows he's going to send his son into the music industry, like he's been told, because of the level of intelligence he sits at? Do you think they're chosen for the families that they are in? Because we were arguing sometimes these musicians, actors, they might actually need some natural talent to actually get them there.
Yeah, and star quality, like could you breed star quality into someone? Or are you saying actually it's different? They might be a politician, they might be a rock star, they might be anything in between. We just see how they kind of blossom. Is it a case of that, do you think?
I can only speculate the same as anyone else can. I can only give it my best guess. And I think it's a number of different scenarios. So I think there might be individuals that show some skill and talent early on as perhaps an actor or as a music maker. And at that point, it might be decided, oh, we're going to usher young whoever it is off into a career in music. Other times it might be that they just possess a natural talent for showmanship or expressing themselves in very creative ways. I think that was probably the case with David Bowie. I think few people would argue the notion that David Bowie is a highly creative, highly artistic individual.
Mm.
And he studied mime actually before he became a music artist. He studied the act of mime acting under Lindsay Kemp, one of the main names in that field. So early on, it could have been that they didn't know whether Bowie was going to be an actor or a musician. He ended up becoming both, of course. Jim Morrison seems to have possessed a propensity towards, he was into magic and like supernatural. He seemed to possess some supernatural abilities. He was into like witchcraft and different occult methods and stuff. And that was channeled into his poetry and his songwriting. So it was probably decided that there was a role for him there. And I think with others, the reason they become such convincing actors and such great musicians, and they become the top of their field, the very best out there, is simply down to the fact that they're sent to many of these foundations and institutes to get the best possible training. Because when money is no object, you can get the best training in any field. So if it's been decided that a certain person is going to become a really great, really prominent actor, off they go to acting school to train in method acting or whatever it is. Doesn't matter how much it costs, they'll be given the very best in the field to train them up. So when they emerge from that process, they're ready to go and they really are the best in their field. Because this is a comment I get often. People will say, "Oh, these bands that you claim are controlled, they write the very best songs, they produce the very best music, they work with the very, very best producers." Of course they do, because they get access to these things by virtue of the fact that they come from these families or they've been selected for the role by social engineers and the controllers of organized society. So they become the very best in their field because it's been facilitated for them.
I think there might be a lot in this idea of these people being actors and lifetime actors. That I feel like that's a phrase that you help coin. But these lifetime actors, like if they become a famous rock star or something, that's just another part that they're playing. You know, someone like Jim Morrison, he might have been an actor, but they obviously had different plans for him. I feel like Tupac is someone else that comes into my mind. Like I know Tupac went to drama school, and I've also seen clips of him on television before he was famous, same as Marilyn Manson. So that's a theme I've seen a lot as well. But I kind of wonder, are a lot of these people just great actors? They're just playing a role.
Well, they are. And the term lifetime actor is one that was coined initially by Joe Atwill, who is the author of Caesar's Messiah, along with other books. And he used to do a really great podcast with Jan Irvin, going back many years, called Unspun. And I used to listen to these, and I learned a lot from those shows about the concept of a lifetime actor and also culture creation. And I came to realize through the research that these guys did, and they took a very scholarly approach to it. You know, Jan Irvin published university style papers full of citations. And Joe Atwill comes out of an academia background. So they were taking that kind of approach to it. And I came to realize that culture creation is a very real thing. So genres, fads, trends, scenes, movements, anytime you get one of these that sweeps up hundreds of thousands or millions of people in its wake and starts changing the way they behave, the way they speak, the way they dress, their lifestyle habits, maybe drugs they start doing, definitely music they start listening to. If millions of people are all doing this in tandem with each other at the same time, there's no way that was grassroots or organic. Sorry, just doesn't work that way. The only logical conclusion is that it's the product of social engineering, and it's come out of one of these think tanks like the Tavistock Institute or the Frankfurt School or the London School of Economics. That's another big one that people often miss. Similar to Tavistock, that place is concerned with shaping and moulding cultural attitudes towards things. Judge Jules, who we mentioned earlier, was an LSE graduate, as was Mick Jagger, going back many years. And a lifetime actor is somebody who's in the public eye, so everyone's heard of them. They're a familiar name, household name, an A-lister. And it could be anything. It could be Bill Gates or Richard Branson from the world of big business, or Elon Musk. It could be Robert De Niro or Al Pacino from the world of acting, or Tom Cruise or Tom Hanks. It could be Mick Jagger or Paul McCartney or whoever he is, or Cliff Richard, Elton John from the world of music. You know, you get the idea. Anyone you've heard of. Celebrity chefs. How about Rick Stein, who is the uncle of Judge Jules? We keep going back to him, but you know, there's a reason why Rick Stein became so prominent as a BBC celebrity chef, and his nephew, Judge Jules, became so prominent as a BBC Radio 1 dance music DJ. It's family bloodlines. And this is lifetime actors. So they're put out there as one thing or the other, celebrity chef, actor. But you realize when you look at their extracurricular activities, which is what I refer to them as, when you look beyond Rick Stein being a chef, or Judge Jules being a DJ, or Robert De Niro being an actor, you realize that they're pushing other things beneath the surface. And, you know, the COVID situation was the perfect example of this, where all these celebrities, with hardly any exceptions, got on board with the official messaging. They were just reinforcing the government narrative on everything. That told us everything we needed to know about where the true allegiances of these people lay. And the idea is that they build a fan base, they get people to like them, and when people start to like them, they start paying attention to whatever it is that they say. So if they start delivering messaging of a more political nature, pushing certain agendas that are going on in society, large numbers of people are that much more inclined to go with that message because it's been delivered by this person who they think that they like. And that's the way so many of these agendas get put into place, whether it's pushing the climate change scam, whether it's pushing LGBTQ, transgender ideology, transhumanism, ideas of AI, ideas of a, you know, technological futurist society, whatever it may be. If these messages are delivered by one of these famous people that have a fan base intact, the messages are going to get carried much quicker and much more effectively than they would have done otherwise. So that's the real job, in my view, that many of these celebrities do. The fact that they're a chef or a DJ or an actor is almost inconsequential, you know, incidental to what their real role is. It's social engineering and mass mind control by any other name, and popular culture and entertainment are the perfect vehicles to get all that stuff carried out into the mainstream of society.
I can't imagine Keir Starmer being a musician.
I don't want to, mate.
The voice on the guy, imagine him like gyrating around as a pop star.
Got shudders going down my spine right now. Like,
I can see why he went into the world of politics.
Don't even want to think about it. Or how about Fatboy Slim as a politician or prime minister?
See, that I could imagine. Yeah. Was Judge Jules called Judge Jules? There was a link there, right? Like the word judge. Was that it was something to do with the way he used to convince them to keep the parties going when the people turned up? Was that it?
He got the nickname Judge because he studied law at London School of Economics. He got a law degree. And then he went into the world of promoting warehouse raves and acid house parties and stuff. So it's like he got the qualification and then did nothing with it, obviously. Years later, he went back and retrained in law and qualified as a lawyer, and he's now a music lawyer with his own practice. But in those early years, he became a DJ immediately after leaving LSE. And when he was doing these warehouse parties with the likes of Norman J and Jazzy B, there were these three big sound systems on the scene at that time. It was Family Function, Shake and Finger Pop, which was Norman J's operation, and Jazzy B with the Soul to Soul sound system, early days. And when the police used to arrive, because they were using warehouses technically illegally for these parties, Jules apparently used to get put out front, and he would convince the cops that this is a private party for his university LSE chums, and it's not a paying party officers. There's nothing to worry about here. Because he was middle class and white and respectable, apparently the cops accepted that. If they'd stuck Norman J out front, who was black, it might have been a different outcome. But that's the story we get. So Judge Jules is just a moniker that he took on. His real name is Julius O'Riordan. With Norman Cook, his real name is actually Quentin. So his first name was Quentin Cook. And he deliberately chose to become Norman and not Quentin so as to sound a little less posh and white working class and a little more regular working class, you know. So he went under the name of DJ Quentox when he was DJing on the Brighton club scene for a while. But in an interview, he actually said early on that he wished he'd come from a working class family. He didn't like the fact that he came from a quite well-to-do, wealthy, you know, upper middle class white family. He wanted to be more working class and proletariat. And that's interesting because Keir Starmer, who was his school chum, of course, is a communist, quite a rabid communist, and embraces that whole way of thinking. So it's like both of them were trying to shake off their roots, where it is that they came from, and they wanted to gravitate more towards being working class men of the people. So maybe that's an ideology that gets trotted out at Reigate School. Who knows?
Yeah.
But Norman Cook, for whatever reason, pursued a path as a DJ and a electronic music producer. And I think he was just being used to help push the culture along. Because I've said on many previous podcasts, I think the acid house rave scene in the UK in the late 80s was, if not a psyop at the start, it may have had some sort of humble, genuine working class beginnings, but it was very clearly steered off very early on in certain desired directions. And when all the tidal waves of ecstasy pills started to arrive, coinciding with all these big open air raves in fields around the M25 and stuff in the second summer of love, 1988-89, it's clear by that point it had been hijacked by certain aspects of military intelligence. And by that point, you also had a lot of posh, upper class public school boys promoting many of these raves. Tony Colston Hayter is an obvious name who did the Sunrise raves. There was Jeremy, what was his name? Jeremy Spencer, was it? He did the Toffs Balls. These were acid house raves specifically for public school boarders. And it was a way of them getting out and partying and getting out of the boarding school dorms and, you know, letting their hair down and having some fun. So that whole scene seems to have been hijacked by elements of the establishment. It wasn't as working class as we've been led to believe it was.
So for what purpose? Because I sort of understand when we've spoken about the 60s, like flower power movement and the purpose of that to sort of get people to cop out, tune out, whatever. What would be the purpose of, say, the second summer of love and the flood of ecstasy and the raves and everything else?
There were a lot of parallels with the earlier 60s scene. So you had MDMA, ecstasy, just coming out of nowhere in huge quantities. And that's similar to what happened with the LSD, the acid, in the 60s. And there's so much documentation now on the public record to show that the LSD was coming through CIA supply lines. So that was a CIA-sponsored event. They wanted the young people of that time to get out of their minds on acid and other drugs. And it was part of the sex, drugs, and rock and roll lifestyle. A big part of that was driving a wedge between the different generations. So they wanted the young people to be totally at odds with the value system of their parents' generation. So each generation just felt alienated from the other. They didn't understand each other, and there was a huge chasm between them. So a lot of that was going on in the 80s. So you had the sons and daughters of you know, a certain generation with a certain value system. Many of them would have been Tory voters at the time. And these kids, their sons and daughters, would have been going off to these parties and doing ecstasy. And this would have been a lifestyle that was completely mystifying to their parents' generation. So that's one box ticked on the social engineers checklist because they love doing that. They love having one generation in society completely at odds with another. It's divide and conquer by any other name. And also, I think there was an experimental aspect to what was going on with the acid house stuff. It was getting monitored and surveilled a lot. So the social engineers wanted to know what would happen when large groups of young people would get together in communal settings and they would pool their consciousness through mind-altering drugs, but also with music playing a big factor, with sound, sonics, So the music that came out of the acid house era was very different to anything that had gone before. It was electronic in nature. It was replacing analog methods of making music, and it was slowly ushering in these methods of doing things. And here we are a generation on, and of course, everything is digital, everything is electronic now. But that was sowing the seeds of it. It was gradually moving away from analog. And also at many of these raves, you had the visuals. The visuals were very important. There were symbols, sigils, signs, icons that meant something. So you can look back now at many of the flyers for these early raves, and you see many recognizable symbols on them. There's the Illuminati all-seeing eye, so-called. You have alien and sort of ET type symbolism all over these flyers. You have pyramids everywhere. These signs that we now recognize as being the calling cards of occult secret societies, they were right there on many of these early flyers. And I think what was happening was that many of these raves and then the clubs, because the music got moved into these licensed super clubs a few years later, and you had the birth of places like the Ministry of Sound, Gatecrasher, Cream, all these huge super club brands. So in those conditions, everything was just getting moved indoors into big rooms where it could be more closely monitored and surveilled. But a lot of people that went to early raves have contacted me over the years. And many of them have said that they felt they were being watched at the time. They couldn't quite put their finger on it, but it always felt as if when they were dancing and expressing themselves freely and they were under the influence of these mind-altering drugs, they just felt like certain parties were watching them. And maybe it was their paranoia, but they just felt like they were getting surveilled the whole time. And I feel that the whole thing would have been a military-grade operation, and they would have had their spotters, their agents, if you like, in attendance at many of these events, just seeing what would happen if large numbers of people were put together in this way. So the ravers of that time were being used effectively as experimental lab rats without their consent, without their knowledge. And who knows what they would have got out of these studies, but that's what I think they were trying to establish, what would happen if these conditions were set into place. So it's mind-altering drugs, the visuals, the sonics, and the communal aspect of everyone coming together. Because what the raves were really bringing out, and what clubbing still does, you can go to any big super club anywhere around the world now, and you'll see the same concept playing out. It's tapping into a very primal part of the human condition. And it's the seeking of togetherness, of that communal spirit that we all seem to have. We gravitate towards that. We want to be around others of a like mind, of a similar consciousness, and we find our tribe and we find a kinship with many of these people. We do it, guys like us, we gravitate towards other conspiracy guys, I guess. And I go now to conferences and meetup groups and stuff, and it's like-minded, truth-seeking people. And it's not the kind of event that I would have been going to 15, 20 years ago. I would have been going to hip hop jams and club nights. But now I go to these sort of things because I'm seeking my tribe, if you like. I want to be around like-minded people. It just seems to be hardwired into us to want to do that. And also we have this natural propensity towards not so much music, but rhythm, I think. That's what it is. We have natural rhythms which pulsate through us, and we gravitate towards expressions of rhythm. That's why music is so appealing to us. And I think that's why the acid house stuff was so appealing, because the rhythms were being kept for the first time, really, in popular music by drum machines and synthesizers. And that's what was happening on a subliminal level to so many of these people that were attending these raves. They were being enticed and lured in by the rhythm of the music because it was appealing to a certain primal instinct within them. And that's been the case throughout known human history. So we could go back several thousand years, and Moby, the dance music producer, made a comment of this nature when he was interviewed for a BBC4 documentary called How Dance Music Changed the World. He made the observation in that interview that if we were doing this interview a few thousand years ago, you could be in some sort of tribal community setting and you'd have people dancing around a fire. There would be some sort of shaman, maybe tapping out the rhythms on a bongo or a drum. And these people might have done plant medicine to change their consciousness, their mind state. And really, those very same elements are still with us. Plant medicine back then, ecstasy or acid or your drug of choice now. Uh, Somebody tapping out rhythms on a bongo or a drum several thousand years ago. Now the rhythm is coming through the music, and the communal setting where they were dancing around a campfire maybe in the middle of the night. Now you're just dancing in a nightclub in the middle of the night. But those same elements are still there, and they keep getting tapped into by the social engineers through these different generations. They update the methods, they update the scenery, but it's the same things that are being explored and exploited. And I think the social engineers, for whatever reason, have an interest in knowing what happens when large groups of young people, because young people are much easier to exploit and shape and mold because they're not as cynical and world weary as guys like me. What happens when they come together in these communal settings? And people think that this is all organic and natural and they've created these scenes for themselves. And like I say, early on, early doors, maybe these scenes did have those kind of beginnings. But when they end up in the form that we recognize now, they have been very much shaped and molded by those that have an interest in exploiting such things.
I guess they understand, like the powers that be, they understand the power that music has and the power that, huge groups of people when they get together have, and really they just want to have control over it, as well as the music itself and the messages that can be carried within the music. But something that's going on at the moment that we wanted to talk to you about, and I know we spoke about Kanye or Ye before, but he's been putting out some really crazy music, like this Heil H track, that I think has shone a light on kind of what we're talking about here. The fact that you can put pretty out there, radical, offensive messages like Kanye just has in a tune, but if it's catchy, then people are going to be singing along to it and it's still going to burrow in their head, even if it is as outrageous as saying Heil, you know who.
Yeah, I mean, Kanye is not an easy figure to work out, is he? He's really not. And what doesn't help is the fact that there have been replacement Kanyes put out there. I mean, I hate to say it because people make these claims all the time. Oh, artists get replaced and they've got doubles and stuff. And some do. Not all, but yeah, some do. And when it comes to Kanye, there's definitely been an individual, at least one, that they've put out there posing as Kanye West, which is not the original Kanye West. So that muddies the waters from the start. And I think they do it to make the lives of guys like us much more difficult because it leaves us not knowing where the hell we are and it leads us off down about 500 different garden paths all at the same time. They've been using a replacement Madonna over recent years. Definitely at least one or more
Obvious.
than one, I would argue.
Because she's
Obvious.
like, it's like she's Benjamin Button. Like looks about 20 or 30 years younger.
Well, 1 minute she looks about 25 and the next minute she looks about 70. So they're paging in these different Madonnas. And again, I think it's partly to make the lives of people like us very, very difficult in getting our messages across. It's also mockery. It's mockery of the masses, the fact that they can get away with this stuff. There was a character they put out there as Madonna in about 2022. And she had pink hair. She'd had loads of work done, obviously Botox and the lips pumped up and stuff. And there's no way that anyone would have looked at that picture and said, oh, that's Madonna, if the caption below it in the mainstream press hadn't said, oh, here's Madonna with her radical new look. That causes the masses to go, oh, well, look at Madonna. But they would never have come to the conclusion that that was her if they'd not been prompted in it. And then what becomes even more confusing is when the original Madonna then reappears. Because all those that may have said, oh, they've got rid of Madonna, they're using this replacement look, that's not her, they look completely crazy to the masses when the original Madonna pops back up with the gap in her teeth, so it's her. And then all the fans go, what are you talking about? There she is. Look, she's gone nowhere. That's the original Madonna. She's always been there. And it's the same thing with Kanye. I think the original Kanye is still around, but for whatever reason, they put the replacement one out there. And he's putting out all these outrageous messages, both in his tunes and also in his interview comments. But a lot of these messages would have been coming from not the original Kanye, I would argue. So is this an effort to demonize him and completely besmirch his name in the minds of the general public, given that a few years ago he seemed to be starting to put out some genuine, sincere messages? And these were framed as incoherent rants. But when you listen to these rants, you realize that actually he was conveying a lot of truth. And I think measures then had to be put into place for some damage limitation so that he didn't completely, spill the beans and reveal
Yeah.
stuff that he wasn't supposed to reveal. So it's very difficult to work out what's going on with this guy. And then when he makes comments like the Heil thing that you just mentioned, and he starts talking about, starts wearing neo, regalia and stuff. I mean, what better way to demonize somebody's image in the minds of the public than to have them doing all that stuff? It's like the most radical thing they can reach for
Mm.
to
Yeah.
try and destroy somebody's public credibility.
Yeah, almost reminds me of Michael Jackson. You know, they've just
Very much so.
assassinated Kanye's character in a different kind of way, but there's a lot of similarities between the two. Like Michael Jackson was going head to head with Sony, calling out the music industry. He was accused of being anti-Semitic, and then obviously all the pedo claims come out about him and Neverland and stuff. Kanye is so similar, but it's almost like they've tried to assassinate his character in a completely different way. Let's turn him into, a fully fledged, you know what?
Yeah.
But it's essentially the same thing, it feels like.
Well, it is very similar, yeah. And when artists start to become a thorn in the side of the establishment, bit of a pain in the arse, they pass their sell-by date, they're not shifting the records that they used to, and they become a problem, quite frankly, to their handlers, their controllers. Well, there are different ways they can deal with that. So there's the Michael Jackson Prince way, George Michael way, if we accept the official account of what happened to them. But I think if they tried something like that with Kanye now, it would be a little bit too obvious. It's the
Mm.
same thing with Brian Harvey of East 17. That guy's been speaking out for years about the true nature of the music industry, and he's made some pretty, you know, um, wild claims. I'm not saying wild as in they're untrue, but they're, people would perceive them as wild claims. They're not wild to people like me because I've been looking at them for years. But if anything would happen to Brian Harvey now, it would be pretty obvious, if he had a crash in his car. If anything happened to Kanye, overdose, fell off a cliff, it would be just too obvious. So I think with some, they realize that they can't knock them off. So they have to try and make them either completely irrelevant or make them seem crazy or make them seem repellent, which is when they bring out the Neo you know what stuff and the Heil you know who stuff.
Mm.
So see, these are measures that are in place to achieve that. And
Yeah.
we've got the whole bloody Sean Combs P Diddy situation now with
Yeah.
that trial in full flow. So I think a lot of the stuff that's going to come out of that is going to cause many people or force many people to face up to the true sordid, ugly nature of the industry. Guys like us have been bashing our heads against brick walls for years, trying to get people to pay attention to the ugly, dark side of the music industry. And I think all the stuff that's going to seep out now into the mainstream off the back of the Diddy stuff is going to force people to have to confront this and
Mm.
then begrudgingly say, oh, actually, those conspiracy guys may have had a point. But I think with the Diddy situation, we're not going to get any real heavy hitters, any real high rollers thrown under the bus. Not the sort of names that we would like to see getting dragged through the mud. What they're going to do is just throw a few low level ones under the bus just to create the impression that something is being done. We're cleaning up here, folks, and then Diddy will probably remain in jail. That's my prediction. And the whole thing will just fizzle out, or that's what they hope will happen. So
Mm.
we've seen this situation many times before, haven't we? And we
We
can predict
did
the way
Jeffrey
it's going to go.
Epstein.
Exactly
Second
that.
Yeah.
time.
He seems just another sacrifice, like R. Kelly and then Diddy. It's like they build these people up to a point and then tear them down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't think Sean Diddy Combs would have seen this one coming because
Mm.
I think he would have assumed that he was too treasured an asset, particularly if he has been running an operation akin to that of Jeffrey Epstein. He's been described as the Jeffrey Epstein of hip hop,
Yeah.
and it's been
Great
alleged,
title.
yeah, not exactly flattering. And he's been accused of running a similar sort of blackmail empire through his mansions and these various parties and freak-offs and stuff that have been happening there. Allegedly, very famous, very powerful people have been in attendance, and they've been filmed getting up to who knows who with who knows what. And that footage is being kept and being used as potential leverage to keep them in line and to make sure they continue to do what they're supposed to do. And I think Diddy probably thought that as he was presiding over an operation of that nature, he was untouchable. He
Mm.
certainly used to carry himself like he's untouchable.
Yeah.
Like he's got protection, nothing's ever going to happen to him. He could be as blatant as he wants. He can go on a video with a young Justin Bieber and say, we're going to go buck wild crazy this weekend. We're going to do stuff that's a 15-year-old's dream, but I can't really talk about it on video. You know, who's comfortable saying that stuff publicly? But he was. And he appeared on a video with his mum, Janice Combs, and he's sharing an IV drip with her. And he's basically saying, oh, we went crazy this weekend. You know, the party was crazy. We're just hydrating right now with his mum. He sat next to his mum, and his mum looks like some kind of prostitute, quite frankly. She's got orange curly hair and she's got these nails. She's had her nails done and she's wearing all this like skimpy gear. And Diddy's saying, oh, yeah, this is my mom. You know, how you doing, mom? I love you, baby. And then they kiss each other full on the lips. And then Puffy says, oh, my mom's single. You know, she's a single woman, guys. Like he's trying to pimp her out. It's crazy. But he's doing this on video, which is put out there publicly. And I think this is an indicator that he thought he was untouchable. He thought he could do anything he wanted and nothing was ever going to happen to him. So when the feds arrived at his mansion in October last year and they started seizing equipment, evidence, and he got hauled in, arrested, and his ass got put in the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, arguably the worst jail in New York, he must have thought, what the hell is happening? The bottom is falling out of my world. Where's all this protection I thought I had? Where are all my friends? Where are they? Well, this is what you come to discover. Where are all my friends? Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes had a song called that, and it's a great one because I'm sure many have discovered to their peril that these people you thought were your friends who had your back, when the you know what hits the fan, they're nowhere to be seen.
Mm. It's funny you said that because the recent footage that come out of Diddy last year giving that infamous Black Billionaires speech. They had a barbecue afternoon and he's got Jay-Z next to him in the video and he's talking about this is exclusively for black billionaires, how we're all so proud we are to be here. And everyone's like, oh, yeah, oh, yeah, like sort of, you know, self-worshipping. But there's one person whose face is just like that and it's Jay-Z because he's standing there with his glass and he's looking at them like, we're probably all going to be in prison soon. And no one, while we're sitting here cheersing champagne glasses, I'm lawyering up. I'm getting the best lawyers ready because it gives that impression.
Well, it could be that, yeah. He may have had the heads up that it's all about to come crashing to the
Mm,
ground in a very radical way. Or
mm.
maybe he's just worried about all these skeletons in the closet coming out. But yeah, there's that billionaire sort of boys club, as you say. There's a secret society called the Boule, which is like a black version of the Freemasons. And there's a Forbes 500 rich list in hip hop, which is published every year. And the names you usually see at the top are Sean P. Diddy Combs, well, not anymore, up to 2024, Dr. Dre, and Jay-Z. They tend to, you know, shuffle around that top three position, but they are arguably the three most powerful men in black music, certainly. But where all that's going to go, I don't know. I've been left with a very sour taste in my mouth, I have to say, when it comes to hip hop and the whole black music scene, because I used to be so into that. I used to play all that stuff as a DJ. And in the 90s, I just absorbed myself in that whole culture and lifestyle. I should have known better, really. I was very naive back in those times, but it's terrible now because you know, I used to look up to Tim Westwood as a DJ, and now he's got all these allegations hanging over him. Although I don't think that's going to go anywhere because it's been over 3 years now and it's going precisely nowhere. Africa Bambaataa, who was one of the founding fathers of hip hop culture, he was this legendary, iconic figure that if you were a serious hip hop head, you revered Bambaataa alongside Grandmaster Flash and Kool Herc. These were the three sort of major figures of that scene. Well, Bambaataa in 2016 became accused of having sexually molested at least two young boys, and many more have come forward with similar accusations since. And it's left his name completely besmirched, you know.
Mm.
And he's pretty much gone into hiding. Nothing's happened to him. He's not going to get arrested, clearly, but that's a real dampener that's been put on one of these major names from that scene. And then
Yeah.
all the stuff with R. Kelly from a few years ago being accused of a lot of similar stuff to P. Diddy, running a sort of mind control harem sex cult, basically, with kept women who are getting drugged and pimped out as sex slaves. That's not a good look, is it? And then all this stuff about Puffy, there's accusations towards Drake. I don't know if that's going to go anywhere. It doesn't seem to be going anywhere, but lots of people have accused Drake of similar things to Puffy. And it's terrible, man. It's just, you know, the whole scene is not what we thought it was.
One of the recent really sordid things that I heard about was Cassie, that Diddy was having a relationship with at the time. She was having sex with other men, and Diddy was a cuck, as they say, and used to like to watch. But then there's been reports that after having sex with the men, she would go into Diddy's hotel room, and then he would like to rub the you know what of the other men onto his chest. And it's just like, what the hell? But to me, straight away, I was like, that's sex magic. You know, that's not just being sordid. You know, these people are practicing these weird occult rituals, and I can't help but think, like when you were just talking about R. Kelly there, and it wasn't he like urinating on young girls and stuff.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
all points to this more. It's more than sordid.
So
It's ritualistic.
ritualistic.
Yeah.
Well, that's a very good observation because Aleister Crowley was into sex magic. And the idea there was that the energetic intensity of a sexual orgasm is like one of the most powerful conditions there is. And that can be harnessed. And if you channel that energy at the point of orgasm towards something you wish to manifest, there are few things more powerful than that. And as part of the sex magic, reportedly, any bodily excretion is fair game. Nothing is excluded.
Ooh.
And I hadn't thought about this before, but yeah, when I think back to stories from the 90s that were coming through about R. Kelly, there were reportedly these videotapes of him urinating on young girls, which is something he used to like to do. And then you've just mentioned that thing there with Puffy. I feel like I need to go and take a long shower after this conversation. But yeah, that could well be sex magic. I've
Yeah.
not heard any direct accounts of Puffy Diddy being into occult ritualistic practices, but it certainly wouldn't surprise me if he
Mm.
was.
Yeah.
So with Jay-Z, Jay-Z was pictured once wearing a sweatshirt saying, "Do what thou wilt," which was the motto of Thelema from Aleister Crowley. So that suggests that Jay-Z was familiar with the works of Crowley and maybe an occultist. So then why would Puffy not be? Why would
Mm.
Dr. Dre
Yeah.
not be? Maybe it's a condition of success when you get to a certain level in those fields that you are required to engage in certain occult practices.
Mm. Well, we were talking about the Chili Peppers album, Blood Sugar Sex Magic, and then you've got this Metallica album for Load, where the front cover is like blood and semen mixed together. So it's pretty, you know, it's like all over the
Mm.
music world.
Well, you mentioned Dave Grohl earlier, and there's an excerpt from Dave Grohl's autobiography, which I mentioned in the new book, where he's talking about doing a ritual to summon the spirit of John Bonham, the drummer with Led Zeppelin, because Grohl used to greatly admire John Bonham's drumming capabilities. And when he was starting out as a musician, he aspired to be like John Bonham. And I watched the documentary recently, Becoming Led Zeppelin, and it interviews Jimmy Page, John Paul Jones, and Robert Plant, the three surviving members of Led Zeppelin. And it's the first time they've ever cooperated in a documentary talking about the band's history and stuff. But there's lots of footage in there of John Bonham, who died young. And this is something we find with pretty much every majorly successful British band that's had a career lasting decades. At least one of their members has died before their time in some strange circumstance or other. And when it comes to Led Zeppelin, it was John Bonham who reportedly died of an overdose, aged 30 something. I think it was 32. And in this documentary, there's lots of footage of Bonham drumming, and it really does appear as if he's getting possessed. You know, he just goes into a completely different state and he's going crazy. He's throwing these drumsticks around. It reminds me of the apes at the start of 2001: A Space Odyssey, the ape that's smashing the bones on the ground. Looks a bit like John Bonham. And it also reminds me of the character Animal from The Muppet Show, who was drumming. And he looks just like John Bonham. His hair's flying all over the place and he's just going crazy with these drumsticks. And that's how John Bonham used to drum. And it really looked as if he was getting taken over by something. Because when you heard him chatting, being interviewed, he seemed quite mild-mannered. He was quite a gentle guy. But he just becomes like this animalistic monster when he channels himself into the rhythms of the music. And so Dave Grohl appeared to admire that. And he talks about this ritual that he prepared involving a pentagram. And he had to get candles, he had to get the lighting just right, and the energy had to be just right, and there were sigils everywhere. And he was trying to summon the spirit of John Bonham and bring it into him so that he could channel his artistry, his drumming capabilities. For me, that's very dangerous stuff to dabble with. I would never want to go anywhere near a ritual of that nature because you've got no idea what you could be bringing through. But evidently, this was important to Dave Grohl, and it becomes yet another example of a musician that's dabbled with occult ideas and practices. So David Bowie was into the Kabbalah, and Jimmy Page was into Thelema, the works of Crowley. Many musicians have been into the works of Crowley, the Beatles, the Doors. And it does seem to become a staple part of the success story of many of these musicians. The really successful ones are the ones that have embraced or dabbled with various ritualistic occult practices. It seems to be woven into the very fabric of the music industry as a requirement for success.
Yeah. All right. Well, before we get too deep into the world of the occult again, we wanted to talk to you about the upcoming rally that you're going to be speaking at, because that's about something completely different. It's going to be in Hyde Park, London. We'll be attending.
Well, actually, I'm not going to be speaking at it anymore. I'm going to be in attendance, but I'm not going to be a speaker anymore.
Okay. But obviously, it's something that, you know, it's a cause that's still really important to you. I wondered if you could tell us, even though you're not going to be speaking, what were you going to be speaking about? And maybe for the people that don't know, explain a little bit about the geoengineering experiments that are taking place in the UK at the moment.
Yeah, well, I spoke at one in Glasgow last year. And the reason I'm not speaking at this one is because I've got an event of my own in Oxford that night, because it's the 21st of June, it's the summer solstice. And months ago, I'd selected that date to do an event in Oxford. So I've got to dash back from London to Oxford. But what I spoke about at the Glasgow one was how we get an insight into the psychopathic nature of the so-called elites, those that feel they have the right to decide which direction human society goes in. Because I don't know about you, but I don't remember ever being asked if I consent to having the skies above my head pumped full of toxic chemical crap. I don't remember ever being asked if I'm okay with having the life-giving properties of the sun blocked out by these chemicals. And I don't remember being asked if I'm okay with what's in these chemicals being pumped into the sky in the first place. Nanoparticulates of certain metals like aluminium, and barium and strontium. Aluminium in particular has been very closely linked with the onset of Alzheimer's and dementia and various other mental health defects. And those who have studied geoengineering, they're called chemtrails, which is the colloquial term for it, but the official term is geoengineering. Those who don't have any particular axe to grind or any ulterior motives, or who aren't funded by any organizations who require certain outcomes to come from their research, have concluded that these properties are present in what's getting pumped out through these planes on almost a daily basis. So, on one level, it's changing the weather quite clearly. There's a reason why we had a beautiful spring, warm, sunny days all through April and May. And then at the onset of June, it suddenly changes and it's cloudy and it's raining all the time and the warm temperatures have gone away. When you would think that the weather would be getting cumulatively warmer as the spring proceeds. But it's not that. And if anything, this year has been more stable weather-wise, I would say, than previous years, where the weather is literally all over the place. You can have 4 seasons in one day. You need quite a long memory to be able to recall when things were slightly more sane when it comes to the weather. And you were able to make more accurate predictions as to the way the weather was going to be at a particular time of the year. These days, you can't. And so much of that is down to the way the weather is being manipulated. So they've come out now and officially admitted to doing geoengineering. They're making out it's some new thing. It's something they're trialing and experimenting for the first time. It's been going on for decades, as anyone who's paying attention would be able to see. But they've had to break surface now and they've had to admit to it because it's becoming so obvious what they're doing. People really are starting to notice. The awareness is beginning to grow thanks to the many great researchers and activists in this field. Matt Landman, who's organising that London event, is one of the leading lights there. And they're admitting now to having to block out the sun. And they're using it to reinforce the nonsense of climate change, global warming, as it's sometimes still referred to. And they're saying, oh, the weather is changing and it's reaching dangerous levels in terms of sunlight and the exposure that we're getting to it. So the only reasonable course of action is to dim the sun and try and take measures to combat climate change. Climate change has been shown to be a major scam. It's one of the major social engineering operations of our time. It's an agenda. It's designed to bring in more taxes. It's designed to restrict our movements and our freedoms and take even more of those away. And the geoengineering side of things is being used to justify many of these measures. It's all nonsense. It can be shown to be so. And the event in London on the 21st of June is going to be drawing attention to these issues. And I'm really hoping it's going to bring a massive turnout of the like we saw from the 2020 and 2021 rallies in London in the wake of COVID and such, because numbers have sadly dissipated and fizzled out when it comes to events of this nature since, I would say, 2022. I notice this at all the conferences I go to and the meetup groups and stuff. The numbers are just nowhere near what they were in 2022. And I think there is an impression on the part of many people that the direct threat that was facing us in those times has pretty much gone away. We're back to normal. It's business as usual. There's a complacency that's set in, and people just think, oh, well, we need to just get on with our lives and we don't want to dwell on all those terrible times. But unfortunately, it hasn't gone away. It's just taken a few steps back. And the agenda, the threat that was there is taking its time to regroup, and then it's going to sadly come surging forward again under a different guise. And the climate change stuff and the geoengineering stuff is like COVID repackaged and rebooted, I feel.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's definitely got worse, hasn't it? Like, although you're saying, oh, it's been going on for decades, which I would agree with, around about the COVID era, it's stepped up a gear. And I would argue it's even stepped up a gear in the last year or so, Before, yeah, you could see the odd chemtrail, but say in the last 12 months, I've seen skies that look like they're cobwebbed with chemtrails. They're everywhere. So they've definitely really stepped it up a gear. And I think that's a major reason that people have been waking up on the whole, because you can't ignore it, although a lot of people still are. But anyone with, eyes to see is being pretty alarmed, I think.
And have you noticed they've been stripping chemtrails into old TV footage and video footage and music
Yeah.
videos and kids' cartoons.
Mm.
So you can go back now and look at music videos from the 80s. There's one from Level 42 that I was looking at. You look at the original version, it's a blue sky. Now, the modern version of it in circulation is crisscrossed with all this white crap that we're so used to seeing. And they're putting it in kids' cartoons. They're putting it on breakfast cereal aimed at kids, crisscrossed white lines in the sky, so that kids growing up now in this era think that's normal. That's just the way the sky is supposed to look. So how evil is that? It's just sick. The individuals behind this are, well, they're Satanists, aren't they? That's why they do it. They're psychopaths. And like I say, it just gives an insight into their mindset, the fact that they think they've got the right to do this. Just imagine the arrogance and the hubris that it takes for a class of people to think that they can dim out the light of the sun, that everyone has a right to absorb and live under and benefit from, but they think they've got the right to make that kind of decision on behalf of the entirety of humanity. That's a eugenicist mindset. That's the mindset of a complete psychopath. And that's the people that we're dealing with here, who at the very top of these hierarchies are controlling these agendas.
Well, you perfectly described Bill Gates there, and I know he was one of the people really pushing this dimming out the sun agenda way before it even got announced in the UK. But isn't there's a geoengineering system called Satan as well, linking it back to the occult again?
Yeah, there's a patent for one of these systems, and it officially puts itself out there under the acronym of Satan. So they're always telling you. This is what I've been saying through my work for years. In music videos and movies and TV shows, they're always telling you what they're doing. They do it in cryptic, veiled, coded form usually, so they're not completely upfront and blatant about it. But with this one, come on. I mean, who can't see this? There was a COVID patent for, I think it was a method of testing, and the acronym came out as PHEIC. And if you speak it out, it's fake. So they're telling you this is fake. It's bullshit. And anyone with the eyes to see, as you say, and a mind capable of critical thought can piece this together and see it for what it is. But unfortunately, still, that doesn't comprise the majority of people in society. So our job remains getting through to the minds of the masses.
Probably the biggest threat that we possibly could be facing, Mark, in terms of the human race up against things like AI to deal with in the future and the 5G weapon system that's going to be thrown up very shortly. But when it comes to geoengineering, what I don't think people really realize now is it's on their doorstep. It's right in front of them, you know.
Yeah.
Well, it's in the sky. It's on their doorstep.
Well,
Well, it lands on their doorstep.
there we go.
Yeah, I mean, these are all subjects that I started looking at years ago when I first got into conspiracy research and culture, and I started looking at the music industry. I was also looking at geoengineering, you know, what is this? What are chemtrails? And AI, the rise of transhumanism. And at the time, we're going back best part of 15 years, I guess, these were threats, but they were moderate threats. They were kind of hovering around the sidelines. Now they're becoming very, very real because AI is controlling everything. AI is writing songs. AI is writing books. I can't count the number of YouTube videos I get directed to where the maker of the video has just plugged a piece of AI software in and they've got a frigging robot to narrate the video because they can't be asked to sit there and narrate it themselves. So it's dominating everything and it's just becoming a part of people's lives. Young people, unfortunately, think it's great because it's time saving and it's convenient. These are very real threats now. And so many of us have been warning for years about how dangerous all this is going to become if it's left unchecked. And yet here we are anyway. I mean, sometimes I just wonder what has been the net effect of all the work that so many of us researchers have been putting in for so many years, tirelessly, out of a desire to uplift and empower humanity. You know, how different would things be now if all of us had just sat on our asses and done bugger all? I think the outcome would be roughly the same sometimes on a bad day.
Oh, I don't know. I think we'd be a little bit
Tell
further.
me I'm wrong. I need to hear I'm wrong.
We'd be much further along, Mark. We'd be much further along. Because of you, we are where we are.
No, I would personally argue if there wasn't the massive pushback and the million marches that we had during the COVID era,
Yeah.
I think they would have gone full tilt with that.
Mm.
I think we might even be already in a living under pretty tyrannical rule. Because if they could have pushed the digital IDs and the vaccine IDs and the travel bans and mandatory jab and stuff, they would have done. It was only because of the pushback that they didn't. And I kind of call me an optimist, but I kind of think the same about this geoengineering. You know, if there is this huge turnout yet again at Hyde Park and they can feel a bit of pushback, they're only pushed so far because at the end of the day, there are millions of us, billions worldwide, only a few of them. So I don't think it's hard to get the powers that be on the back foot. So it's not all in vain, Mark.
No, I do agree with you actually on that front. And I did make that comment slightly to kind of stimulate that sort of response from you because I wanted to hear you say it. But yeah, I do agree with you that if we hadn't pushed back during the COVID times, we'd be in a much worse place now. And I think there's still a glimmer of hope, forgive the pun, when it comes to geoengineering, because it's something that affects everyone and it's an obvious threat. And I think this event in Hyde Park is going to make a lot of difference. I hope it does. I think the really major threat is the AI transhumanism thing because of what I just said. People's lives have been made so convenient because of it. We're all using bloody digital technology. I've caved in and got my first smartphone. I'm sorry to say. I was using burner phones for years and the burner phones kept breaking. And I just thought in the end, you know, for the sake of being able to do my work and just being able to communicate, I've got to cave in and get a smartphone. So I held off for many years, but now here I am with everyone else on board with that. And I think this is going to be the really difficult one to turn around because technology has come into people's lives to such a degree that particularly young people, you know, Gen Z, as they're called, are not going to want to give up their gadgetry and their technology easily. And the way AI systems are being sold is that they make our lives so much better, so much quicker, so much more convenient. That's going to be the really difficult one to turn around, I feel. The propaganda of all of that is going to be so much more difficult to unpick than these other agendas.
I can't imagine a young person giving up their mobile phone over my dead Facebook profile. You know,
oh, young people don't use Facebook.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
No one under 35 uses Facebook.
I should sound my age now, Mark, aren't I? I really am.
Yeah, I mean, they're all TikTok and Snapchat, aren't they? And whatever else.
All right, Mark. Well, we'll leave it there. We don't want to keep you for too much longer, but thanks so much for joining us again today and talking about your new book and talking about the rally that you won't be speaking at, but you will be attending, the same as us. So maybe we'll see you there.
Well, you never know. Yeah.
Yeah, marching along. We won't have a banner this time, like we had in the COVID era.
Well, I don't think COVID 1984 really suits the geoengineering rally.
If I had a banner, it would just say "Look up" and with arrows pointing up to the sky.
That's all you need to say. Have you missed those rallies?
Yeah.
Yeah, I really have.
Yeah, they were great. Yeah. I mean, I've never been to. I feel like we said this to you at the time, but we've never been to rallies and they had that atmosphere.
So powerful.
It really was.
Amazing.
Yeah, I'm kind of hoping this geoengineering thing's the same because everyone that I spoke to that is aware of the chemtrails, and it always makes me laugh that, you know, people believed in COVID, like a virus that you couldn't see, there was no evidence of, but they don't believe in chemtrails, and all they've got to do is look up at the sky. But most people, you talk to them about it, they just go blank. But when you talk to someone, they're like, oh my God, yeah, how bad is it? You think, oh my God, like you said earlier, someone in my tribe, someone I can actually talk to.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I remember having a conversation with the mother of a child who was at the same school as my daughter many, many years ago when they were little. And it was a summer's day. And of course, the skies were crisscrossed with all this crap. And we were walking across this field. And I said, what do you think of all this then? You know, all this crap they're putting in the skies. And she wouldn't look up. She just went, oh yeah. And then she tried to hurry away. And I said, no, look up, look at this. What do you think of this? And she just would not turn her head up. And then she made her excuses and sort of scurried off to avoid having to look at it. So it's probably that way with a lot of people. They know something's going on, but they don't want to have to face it because it might rock their world. It might change things. They might then have to do something. So they block it out.
Yeah.
and just deliberately don't look at it.
Yeah. It reminds me of the glasses in They Live. You know, that scene where he's like, just look through the glasses.
And he has to beat the shit out of him and force him to put the glasses on before he'll look through.
That's what you should have done.
Oh, you know what? I'll take the horrors of the
metaphor.
world. I'll take the horrors of the world over cognitive dissonance any day.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
just hit me. I'm ready, and I can take it.
Well, it's too late for us now anyway, because you can't turn back.
No, no.
Very
I
true.
was about to say, unfortunately not. A bit like what you were saying earlier, I feel like on a good day, you know, I'm full of optimism and I wouldn't have it any other way. On a bad day, I just want to go back to complete ignorance, you know.
Football and EastEnders.
Yeah. Exactly, yeah. We were going to talk to you also, I don't think we've got time really, but about Katy Perry in space, because it's kind of music linked somehow. What was your opinion on that briefly?
It was just so obviously fake. Is there really anyone that took that seriously? That was like, oh my God, Katy Perry went to space. It's like they went to great lengths to show you how fake it was. Like the door popping open from the inside when that wasn't supposed to happen. And Katy Perry, why? I mean, of all the people that could go to space, not a qualified astronaut then, not a military person, but Katy Perry, why would you do that?
Yeah.
It's almost as if I think they do these stunts every now and again to measure the stupidity of the masses. And they want to see how many people will fall for it. And they probably closely monitor all the social media platforms where this has been posted, read the comments, and they want to see how many people are saying, what a load of shite. This is ridiculous. This is absolute nonsense. Versus, oh my God, Katy Perry is so awesome. She went to space. That's so cool. I like to think that the first type of comment is going to outweigh the second type many times over. From what I did see of the social media platforms, it did. People were saying this is fake, this is nonsense. But I think it is an experiment. They want to see how many people are buying it.
I think an experiment and maybe another ritual, because we were speaking about this earlier. It seemed like a giant sex ritual again. They had this huge penis-shaped rocket, and there was a load of like occult symbolism going on.
The ringing of the bell, the Baphomet,
the Baphomet on the crest of their space suits,
turned upside down. Yeah,
the fact that Katy Perry was flying about in zero gravity, and she had this butterfly,
giving it like the old
monarch butterfly, you know, MK Ultra putting it over one eye. It was littered with it. Yes, yet again. So was it just another huge ritual?
I think there are probably ritualistic elements to it as well. Yeah. So there's more than one reason why they do their stunts. You know, there'll be a preliminary reason which will fulfill some agenda or other, but they'll never miss the opportunity to strip in a bit of ritualistic occult stuff as well.
Yeah. Is it a bird? Is it a plane? Is it a chemtrail? Is it Katy Perry?
On a giant space cock.
I hope you enjoyed that episode of The Schism. We've got plenty more episodes on the way. In the meantime, follow us on our Instagram at schism.tv and keep watching the skies.